prepare yourself, because today night is not going to feel like an ordinary night. The moon is going to seem to vanish before your eyes. And this is not being offered as a metaphor or a poetic symbol. 93% of its surface will literally disappear into the shadow of the Earth. And as the eclipse deepens, that familiar lunar face will take on the unmistakable copper-red glow that makes a lunar eclipse feel almost otherworldly. But the physical event is only the visible layer of what is unfolding. As the moon moves into that shadow, something you have been holding inside for a very long time may finally begin to leave with it. This is not simply another full moon passing through the calendar, and it is not merely another eclipse that you can observe and then forget. Today, night's partial lunar eclipse in Pisces represents the emotional climax of an entire eclipse season that began when the total solar eclipse in Leo ignited the sky on August the 12th. That earlier eclipse opened a doorway into questions of identity, creativity, courage, and self-expression. Today, night's eclipse pushes that process toward a much more emotional confrontation. It is as though the doorway that was gently opened before is now being forced completely apart, revealing what has been waiting behind it. There is another layer that makes this moment especially significant. This eclipse lands at one of the most mythologically charged degrees in the zodiac, a degree connected with an ancient royal star that has been associated for thousands of years with both enduring greatness and dramatic downfall. That symbolism matters because it speaks to the fragile boundary between believing you have everything under control and discovering that control was never as secure as you imagined. I will explain exactly what that means for you. But before we reach that point, you need to understand why the next few hours carry a different emotional weight from anything you have experienced this year. 3 buried truths have been gathering underneath the surface of this eclipse. They are 3 cosmic facts that have been building throughout the month, quietly increasing the pressure until today. Night makes them impossible to overlook. If you've recently felt an unusual heaviness in your body, a strange fog inside your thoughts, or an almost impossible to explain feeling that something enormous is approaching, pay attention to that feeling. You are not simply imagining a change because the eclipse energy is already surrounding you. What you are sensing is the culmination of a process that has been building all month. To understand why today matters, you have to step backward and see how the entire month created the pressure leading here. August 2026 did not unfold as one isolated astrological event after another. It developed like a rising emotional storm, with each cosmic trigger adding another layer of intensity. The first major spark arrived on August the 12th with the total solar eclipse in Leo. That eclipse marked the beginning of a new chapter centered on creativity, identity, and the courage to express yourself differently. It challenged you to step toward a bolder and more authentic version of who you are. Maybe you felt that challenge immediately. Maybe you made a decision that surprised even you. Maybe something shifted inside your chest on that day, something you could feel but could not fully explain. And perhaps that feeling has still not settled. Then the atmosphere began to change. Around August, the Sun moved into Virgo, and 2 days later, Mercury followed. The fiery, expansive quality of Leo gradually gave way to an energy that was sharper, more analytical, and much more critical. Instead of simply feeling what was happening, you started examining it. Instead of allowing yourself to dream, you began taking the dream apart and inspecting every piece. The inner message changed from "take the leap and trust that the net will appear" to questioning where the net is, whether it is strong enough, and who built it in the first place. That conflict is important because it reveals the exact psychological fault line this eclipse is preparing to expose. One part of you wants to surrender to what cannot yet be understood, while another part wants to calculate every possibility before taking another step. One side wants faith, the other demands evidence. One side wants release, the other keeps tightening its grip. Today, night's eclipse presses directly against that contradiction, And when the pressure reaches its peak, you may finally understand why this month has felt heavier than it should have. It was not random. It was preparation. The first truth is uncomfortable, but you can no longer avoid it. Your constant attempt to manage every detail of your life may be the very thing consuming your energy. The eclipse occurs at 4 degrees 50 minutes and 1 minute. Pisces, directly opposite the Sun, at 4 degrees 50 minutes and 1 minute Virgo. This places the focus directly across the Virgo-Pisces axis, a polarity described here as one of the most psychologically and physically charged divisions of the zodiac. Virgo represents the part of you that analyzes, organizes, categorizes, and searches for practical certainty. It is the inner voice that wants systems for everything, even for emotions that were never meant to fit neatly into a system. It is the part of you that can create detailed plans simply to feel safe, establish routines to reduce uncertainty, and convince itself that enough preparation can prevent anything from going wrong. Pisces stands at the opposite end of that spectrum. Pisces represents dissolution, surrender, intuition, and the willingness to move forward even when the entire path cannot be seen in advance. In the symbolism used here, Virgo is connected with the intestines, including the small intestine and the enteric nervous system, that internal laboratory involved with deciding what the body absorbs and what it rejects. Pisces is associated with the immune system, the lymphatic circulation, the pineal gland, and the feet that continue carrying you forward even when the destination remains unclear. Virgo asks for a plan. Pisces asks for trust. Virgo wants to understand before surrendering. Pisces understands that certain experiences can only be known through feeling them, and that is where the pressure you may be experiencing becomes so revealing. The mind may be demanding control, while another deeper part of you is pleading for release. In this framework, the conflict is not merely emotional. It is described as something that can be felt through the body as well. You may have noticed digestive discomfort, sudden exhaustion, or the peculiar combination of feeling overstimulated while simultaneously having almost no energy left. Your thoughts keep racing, yet your body feels as though it wants to stop completely. You may even notice unusual sensations around your stomach, unexplained bloating, or nervous energy sitting in the center of your abdomen. These experiences are presented as expressions of the tension between the Virgo desire to hold everything together and the Pisces need to loosen the grip. The message of the eclipse is simple, but difficult to accept. You cannot continue doing both forever. If you have been micromanaging every area of your life, watching every detail obsessively, and exhausting yourself trying to preserve the belief that everything remains under your command, today night may challenge that entire strategy. The illusion of control may be taken from your hands, gently or forcefully. And yes, that can feel frightening, especially if control has been the way you have protected yourself from uncertainty. But there is a deeper realization waiting underneath that fear. What feels like losing control can actually become the first opening into genuine freedom. Some of what may be released was never truly protecting you in the first place. The exhausting relationship you have continued carrying because guilt made you afraid to let it go may belong to this process. The professional path that stopped nourishing you 2 years ago may also belong to it. Even the daily routine that appears productive from the outside but leaves you internally empty can become part of what you finally recognize. The point is not destruction for the sake of destruction. The energy of Pisces does not erase simply to leave a void. It dissolves what has become too rigid to continue, and that realization is where the next layer of this eclipse begins. Do not mistake what is dissolving for something that is simply disappearing, because what no longer belongs in your life is being cleared away so that something more honest can finally take root. The movement has already begun, and the real question is not whether your circumstances will shift, because they already are. The question is, Whether you will exhaust yourself trying to swim against the current, or whether you will trust the movement enough to let it carry you towards something that fits who you are becoming. And if you imagine that this transition will unfold quietly and gradually, prepare yourself, because the second truth arrives with a completely different force. The shock is the upgrade. This is where the atmosphere becomes volatile, and you need to pay close attention, because the gentle dissolving quality associated with Pisces is not going to be the only influence operating here. Pisces may prefer release that happens quietly, almost invisibly, like mist disappearing with the first light of morning. But another planetary force is entering the picture, and that force has no interest in making its arrival comfortable. Less than 3 hours after the eclipse reaches its peak, Mercury in Virgo forms an exact and forceful square with Uranus in Gemini. Then, only a few hours later, the Sun repeats that same confrontation, with both occurring at 5 degrees, 37 minutes. This creates an extremely precise collision with Uranus, the planet traditionally associated with sudden change, disruption, surprise, and events that refuse to follow the schedule you created for them. There is very little room here for pretending that everything can simply continue as it was. There is another detail that makes this even more intense. The eclipsed moon itself sits less than 1 degree away from forming a square with Uranus. So this is not merely an emotionally heavy eclipse. Within the symbolism of this reading, it carries an electrical quality, as though emotional release and sudden awakening are happening at the same time. Uranus is often described as the Great Awakener, because it does not always offer a gradual introduction to the truth. Sometimes it forces your attention by breaking the pattern you have become comfortable with. Under this influence, information you never expected to discover can appear without warning. A conversation can suddenly turn in a direction nobody anticipated. A plan you considered secure can be rearranged almost overnight. Technology may malfunction. Travel may become more complicated, and an unexpected statement from another person may completely rewrite the version of events you have been carrying inside your mind. Pay particular attention to communication, because Uranus is moving through Gemini, the sign associated with communication, information, and the nervous system. The disruption may therefore arrive through something as ordinary as a message or an email. It could begin as a completely normal conversation and end with you realizing that your entire understanding of a situation needs to be reconsidered. Something you hear today, or during the days surrounding this eclipse, may alter the way you think about circumstances you previously believed you had already figured out. Your mind may also feel unusually active. Mercury represents thought and mental processing, and here it is being electrically stimulated by Uranus, while simultaneously attempting to process the deep emotional release represented by the moon in Pisces. Imagine trying to mourn something that is leaving your life while also being asked to solve a complicated problem at the exact same moment. That contradiction can feel overwhelming. Your nervous system may register the pressure through restlessness, racing thoughts, heightened alertness, or the strange impression that your mind is receiving more information than it has the capacity to organize. Yet there is a deeper truth hidden inside that apparent disorder, and this is the part many people will miss. Chaos is not necessarily the enemy. In this interpretation, chaos is the mechanism through which the update occurs. Think about what happens when a system needs to be upgraded. The old process cannot always remain fully active while the new one is being installed. Something has to interrupt the previous operation first. That is the metaphor for what this eclipse and Uranus combination represents. Sudden turns, uncomfortable revelations, unexpected disruptions, and those moments when reality seems to shift underneath your feet are not automatically signs that you are being punished. They can represent the removal of an outdated internal program, making space for something clearer, faster, and more aligned with the person you are becoming. The real challenge is what you do after the interruption. Some people will fight it. They will cling tightly to the old explanation, reject information that contradicts what they believed, and insist that reality return to the shape it had before the eclipse. Others will attempt to force every new development back into an old pattern, because accepting the change would require them to admit that something has already ended. Those who respond this way may experience themselves as stuck for weeks, perhaps even months, because they are spending their energy resisting a process that has already started. But there is another way to meet the same moment. There are people who will encounter the surprise and simply say, "I did not expect this, but I'm willing to listen." They will allow the new information to settle before rushing to control it. They will let the unexpected reveal what they could not see while everything remained familiar. Those are the people most likely to look back on this period and recognize that the disruption was not the collapse of their path. It was the turning point. So when something unexpected arrives during the next 48 to 72 hours, and this reading suggests that something will arrive, do not immediately assume that you have to fix it. Do not force yourself to understand every detail before you have emotionally processed what happened. Do not turn every surprise into another problem that must be solved before you are allowed to breathe. Let the information land. Give yourself enough space to recognize what it changes. Allow the experience to reorganize your perspective. Because within the logic of this eclipse, the disturbance is not random. It is precisely connected to the process of evolution already underway. Fighting against it only delays the adjustment that is already trying to occur. And now we return to something I mentioned earlier, because this is where the meaning of the eclipse becomes even more specific. Remember when I told you that this eclipse falls on one of the most mythologically charged degrees in the zodiac? This is the reason. At 4 degrees, 51 minutes, Pisces, the eclipse aligns with Fomalhout, one of the 4 royal stars of ancient Persia, known for thousands of years as the Watcher of the South. This is not being presented as an insignificant astrological footnote. Fomalhaut is traditionally regarded as one of the most powerful fixed stars in the sky, and its symbolism has been associated with Archangel Gabriel, immense spiritual power, poetic brilliance, artistic genius, lasting legacy, and a distinctive form of charisma capable of moving entire groups of people. When Fomalhaut is activated, the symbolism becomes elevated. It can propel individuals and movements toward extraordinary influence and enduring significance. But there is a condition attached to that symbolism, and this is where the story becomes much more serious. Fomalhaut demands absolute purity of intention. It is associated with rewarding authenticity while exposing deception. If someone seeks power primarily to feed the ego, if leadership is built through manipulation, or if spiritual influence is turned into a vehicle for personal gain, the symbolism is not one of simple withdrawal. It points toward a dramatic reversal, a fall so visible that others cannot ignore it. Under an eclipse aligned with Fomalhaut, the metaphor becomes an audit of authenticity. The distance between what someone presents publicly and what they actually live privately becomes increasingly difficult to hide. False narratives begin losing their ability to hold everything together. A person you trusted may reveal a side of themselves you never imagined existed, and when that happens, the shock may not come only from what they did, but from realizing how long you were looking at the story instead of the truth. And that realization leads directly into what this eclipse is preparing to reveal next. You may reach a moment when a belief you have carried about yourself begins to crack, especially a belief that looked spiritual, noble, or deeply virtuous from the outside. But underneath it was actually a sophisticated way of avoiding the transformation you knew you needed to make. This is where the shadow side of Pisces can become most dangerous, because spiritual language can sometimes become a hiding place. Meditation, affirmations, positive thinking, and cosmic vocabulary can all become beautiful tools. But they can also become ways of avoiding the difficult, ordinary, uncomfortable work of changing the reality of your life. You can tell yourself that you are healing while continuing to remain inside the same relationship patterns. You can repeat that you are aligned while continuing to make the same choices that keep you exhausted. You can speak about surrender while secretly controlling every outcome you are afraid to lose. Fomalhout does not care how many crystals sit around you or how often you have declared yourself aligned. Its symbolism asks a much more demanding question. Are you actually living your truth when nobody is watching, inside the ordinary routines, responsibilities, relationships, financial decisions, work choices, and uncomfortable moments that make up your real existence? That is where authenticity becomes measurable. It is easy to feel spiritually connected when you are sitting quietly in meditation. It is much harder to remain connected to that truth when someone disappoints you, when money requires a difficult decision, when work no longer reflects who you are, or when you must establish a boundary that makes another person unhappy. This is why the Sabian symbol associated with 5 degrees Pisces adds another powerful layer to the story. The image connected with this degree is a church bazaar, a setting where spiritual devotion and material reality are required to exist in the same physical space. Commerce takes place in service of faith, and money changes hands not simply for personal profit, but to sustain something considered sacred. The symbolism creates a direct challenge to the habit of separating your spiritual identity from the rest of your existence. Your devotion cannot remain meaningful only when you are meditating. Your growth cannot remain an idea that sounds beautiful inside your mind. It has to become visible through the way you treat people, the way you approach your work, the way you handle financial choices, the way you respond to responsibility, and the decisions you make during ordinary days when there is nothing mystical happening around you. Today, night's eclipse therefore asks you to bring what you believe into the physical world, or to stop pretending that you already live there. What replaces the old pattern can remain with you for years. And that brings us to the third truth, the truth that gives everything else its larger meaning. If the first truth concerns surrender, and the second truth concerns disruption, then the third truth concerns what can emerge after the old structure has been cleared away. The universe is not simply tearing everything down and leaving you surrounded by ruins. Beneath the emotional upheaval, another structure is beginning to take shape, and according to this astrological interpretation, it is designed to be more stable than what you have known for years. On Monday, August the 31st, only 3 days after the eclipse, Jupiter at 13 degrees, 40 minutes, and 1 minute. Leo forms an exact trine with Saturn at 13 degrees, 40 minutes, and 1 minute, Aries. Look closely at those positions, because the alignment is exact, down to the minute of arc. Jupiter represents expansion, vision, belief, optimism, and the courage to imagine possibilities larger than your present circumstances. Saturn represents discipline, endurance, structure, responsibility, and the patience required to create something capable of lasting. When these two planets meet through an exact trine in fire signs, the symbolism points toward an unusually strong foundation for long-term development and achievement. This is the part of the eclipse story that can easily be overlooked because people naturally focus on what disappears, what breaks apart, and what suddenly changes. But the deeper purpose of the clearing is what comes afterward. Everything dismantled, released, or unexpectedly reorganized by the August 28th eclipse creates room for what Jupiter and Saturn begin constructing on August 31st. If you feel an emptiness after something leaves, do not automatically assume that emptiness means you have made a mistake. That empty space may be where an old relationship once consumed your emotional energy. It may be the space occupied by an outdated professional identity. It may be the silence left behind when an anxious internal monologue finally stops repeating the same fears. What feels empty can actually be unfinished architectural space, a cleared foundation waiting for something stronger to be built. And this is not presented as a temporary event. The Jupiter-Saturn trine on August the 31st is the first of three exact alignments between these two planets, extending into 2027. That means what begins during the final days of August 2026 is not being described as a passing emotional adjustment. It is the opening stage of a construction process that can unfold across several years. The choices you make after this eclipse, the boundaries you establish, the paths you decide to pursue, and the structures you choose to build can influence the direction of your life for years ahead. This is why the next step requires patience. When the eclipse removes something, whether that is a habit, a person, or a belief, resist the instinct to immediately fill the empty space with whatever appears first. Do not rush toward replacement simply because silence feels uncomfortable. Allow the absence to exist for a while. Let the space breathe. Jupiter and Saturn represent the possibility of something more substantial, something capable of lasting, something that reflects the version of you emerging from this transition. But new structure requires room to be built, and that is why the emptiness itself has meaning. There is also a much larger picture beneath the eclipse, the Uranian shocks, and the Jupiter-Saturn foundation, something generational that places your personal experience inside a much broader transformation. At this time, three outer planets form a rare geometric alignment that astrologers call the magic triangle. Pluto in Aquarius is dismantling outdated power structures and accelerating technological transformation. Neptune, newly entered into Aries, is igniting a bold and individualized spiritual awakening. Uranus in Gemini is revolutionizing the movement of information, the ways human beings communicate, and the ways people think. Together, these three outer planets represent one of the most significant outer planetary configurations of the 21st century. The lunar eclipse in Pisces then functions as the emotional trigger, the localized personal catalyst that connects your individual experience to this much larger shift. Think of the relationship between the two levels this way. The outer planets are participating in the construction of a different world, while the eclipse clears emotional remnants from the previous one so that you can actually participate in what is emerging. Technological changes, spiritual breakthroughs, and revolutions in communication are moving forward, whether you feel prepared for them or not. The purpose of this eclipse, within this interpretation, is to make you more prepared by forcing you to confront whatever has been keeping you emotionally attached to the past. So where does all of this land in your own life? The precise answer depends on your rising sign and your sun sign, but there is a broader message that applies across the entire story. Something you have continued holding because of fear, obligation, or habit is approaching a point where you can no longer maintain the same grip. You may experience that release as a loss. You may even need to grieve what is leaving, especially if you have spent years building your identity around it. But within 72 hours, the emotional atmosphere may begin to feel different. You may notice a sense of lightness. You may recognize a clarity that was impossible to access, while you are constantly trying to control the outcome. You may still not know exactly where the road leads, yet somehow the uncertainty can feel more honest than the path you were walking before. The activation of the nervous system described in this eclipse story may also leave you feeling nervous, emotional, or physically exhausted during the days that follow. Honor that response. Slow down when you can. Drink water. Sleep when your body asks for sleep, even if your mind insists that there is still more to accomplish. The symbolism of the gut-brain axis being recalibrated points toward the need for rest while this process unfolds. Most importantly, learn to trust what is leaving. Trust the disruption enough to listen to what it reveals. Trust the empty space instead of rushing to cover it. Because what is being assembled on the other side of this eclipse is not simply another chapter added to the same story. It represents the possibility of an entirely different book, one shaped by a version of you that no longer needs the old structures to feel safe. The Pisces lunar eclipse does not wait for perfect comfort or complete readiness. It arrives, illuminates what has been hidden, and carries away whatever stands between you and a more truthful understanding of yourself. Today night, the moon will take on that distinctive copper-red appearance, while a thin, bright white crescent remains along its northern edge, resembling a single candle still burning inside a darkened room. Hold on to the meaning of that image. Darkness does not have to represent an ending. It can represent the threshold before something becomes visible. And beyond that threshold, something extraordinary may be waiting for the space you are finally willing to create. If you're still watching, thank you for giving this moment your attention. If this content resonated with you and you would like to see more, consider subscribing. Your support means a great deal. You are also welcome to share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Until we meet again, take care of yourself and stay connected for more meaningful content.